start from scratch project. You know, you're not necessarily blazing new trails in ground that has already been tilled here. You can actually, you know, learn, and somehow we need the Department of Justice to kind of coordinate. That's why they're all within one. We have one Attorney General who could say, look, you can solve 80–90% of this with best practices, and these are the tools and the mechanisms and the software, quite frankly, in order to track and do these types of things. And I don't expect you to respond to that other than to say it would be encouraging to know that we're getting some economies within the Department of Justice.
If I could respond to it, I mean, and hopefully this will be a piece of good news. We are actively working with both the Bureau and the other components right now to look at those best practices, especially when it comes to subsources and other categories that we've struggled with.
Okay.
So that process is already underway.
Very good. Let's go back to the $1.5 million, I believe the number is, that was paid to TSA employees and Amtrak. I don't know if it's employees or employee. Let's first go to Amtrak. What were we paying off? What were we getting for that money? I believe it was $800,000+ went to one Amtrak employee over a course of 20 years. What did we get for that? What was he giving you or she giving you on a monthly, daily, whatever basis it was?
The individual is providing information related to suspicious travel, last-minute purchases of tickets, other things that would raise to that level over the course of that 20 years.
But why do you have to pay for that to an individual? Why not go to Amtrak and say, look?
So I don't have the good answer for why this started back in the 90s. What I can tell you is that this practice has been stopped. We have clear guidance that this is not permitted for both quasi-government and government employees, that there is no payments to be made if they are performing as an individual providing information that they should be doing in their daily job. So it is fixed moving forward. I don't feel like I have a satisfactory answer. I know we have engaged with Amtrak to try and acquire this information. That is still a work in progress. You know, I don't think it's as simple as, you know, having access to information. I think it's knowing more about that. And like I said, we're working on that currently with Amtrak.
Let's go to the TSA. How many TSA employees were you paying off?
I believe I think it was a total of 8 had been established at some point. I think 2 or 3 of those individuals ultimately received payments. I know there is an ongoing investigation by the OIG, which I don't believe we've commented on.
It's a significant amount of money to TSA, right? How much money went out the door to TSA employees?
I think it was, I don't know the exact figure, sir. It was in the $50,000 to $100,000 range, I believe.
Inspector General Horowitz, do you have any? Can you illuminate this anymore?
I'm just looking for the precise number.
So I guess staff is telling me the number is about $84,000 paid to 3 different people.
Yep.
What were the TSA employees providing the DEA surreptitiously?
I believe it was information related to seizures of currency.
Yeah. Seizures of currency?
Right, information related to passengers. These were screeners with TSA, not law enforcement personnel. That was the weakness in our policy, quite frankly, is it dealt with law enforcement individuals. And I said, again, that practice has been stopped and it's clear in policy.
Okay, so since it's stopped, we can talk about what had happened. So when they were finding currency, they would go to the DEA and say, hey, I found some currency, give me some cash?
My understanding, they were being asked if they saw currency as you went through an X-ray to tip the DEA to that so they could follow up on it afterwards. And of course, that's a potentially, depending on how it's arranged, wholly inappropriate use of the entire screening system that's been put in place in this country and raises, again, Fourth Amendment issues as to who they worked for. Did those individuals, were they incentivized through the payments to be DEA, arms of DEA, and be supporting criminal investigations, or were they there in a public safety role to protect the flying public?
So where is this?
The reason why I hesitate is because I know there is an ongoing OIG investigation, and that's why I didn't, I'm not familiar with their investigation. We'll obviously look at any administrative impacts that come at the completion of that investigation.
So is it fair to say, Inspector General, that there is an ongoing OIG investigation into this?
We are continuing to review that and through our investigations.
And is the Inspector General for Homeland Security involved in that, or is this just coming through DOJ?
He is aware of that, and we've been in communication as our teams on all of these issues.
So I'm trying to figure out who did something wrong and who's going to be held accountable for that, and what were the implications? I don't.
Right. Well, we've certainly, for example, on the Amtrak matter, we worked closely with the Amtrak OIG to move forward and look at that matter, and we're doing the same on the Homeland Security side with our counterpart at OIG there. And we'll hold accountable, as we always do, the individuals that we find engaged in wrongdoing, whether criminal or non-criminal. Criminal obviously goes through a judicial process. Administrative, non-criminal, we would report back to DEA for their handling on administrative matters.
To Mr. Patterson, I want to ask you here. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, an article by Alan Judd of November 28th, sex, drugs, and the DEA, Atlanta agent accused of improper conduct. An Atlanta-based supervisor allegedly having a sexual relationship with 2 DEA confidential informants and arranged for the agency to pay one of them some $212,000. Senator Grassley, again, has been leading out on this, and hats off to his good work and him and his staff. Where is this investigation, and what's being done about this?
Again, this was an investigation in which we had gone to OIG. It had come back to DEA. We began the investigation. As we did, we found issues that rose to potential criminal charges. We went back to OIG. They've been handling that part. I will tell you, though, sir, and outside of that, and I'll leave that to Mr. Horowitz to discuss if he can, we've held managers accountable as well as people below them in this particular instance.
You've done what with them?
We've investigated and held managers accountable.
When you say held them accountable, how did you hold them accountable?
Well, ultimately they resigned. But they were being investigated by the Office of Professional Responsibility for their role in oversight.
How many people resigned?
The individual. We had an agent, task force officer returned to his department, and then a grade 15 retire from DEA.
So he gets full benefits, he's no prosecuted, so you just let him go, no prosecution?
It's not criminal in nature for him. I will also say one other thing is the employee was put out on suspension without pay during the course of the investigation.
How long had he worked for the DEA?
I
had to guess.
Yeah, I think it's about 15 years. Again, I can find that out for you.
Well, look, again, this is a tough thing because the men and women, 9,000 plus employees, did I take it right? They do a good, hard, decent, patriotic job. They put their lives on the line, and we're immensely grateful. But you do have bad apples, as we do, in every department and agency, quite frankly. The bigger agency, this is going to happen. I mean, just human nature, the odds are that the bigger the department and agency, you're going to have more and more bad apples. It's just a reality of it. But it is important that I feel very strongly and passionately the idea that you need to hold people accountable, and they do need to have consequences. And I worry that it's all too often in the federal government, they just walk away. Go ahead and retire, get your full benefits, pat you on the back on the way out, when you've done something really dramatically wrong. And And in some cases, it is criminal, so other parts it's not. But I want people to be held accountable, and I want the other 9,000 people who do it by the book and do it right to know that when somebody does step over the line, there are consequences, and not just, hey, go ahead and retire and move on. That seems to fall far short of the proper justice that should be required. So, listen, we appreciate, again, please carry back how much we do appreciate the DEA and the tough work that they do. To the Inspector General, you've got a wonderful staff. They do hard work over, in this case, close to 3 years. But let's also make sure that, this was done 10 years ago, and we didn't learn the lessons and implement that. I don't want to come back again and only to find out that with a change of administration or change of personnel that this gets forgotten about. And I think that's incumbent upon us to continue to ask you about it and make sure that the progress continues. But it's also just the best practice to make sure that the future generation of people that are working at the DEA have the proper support, the resources, the policies to protect themselves, but also to make sure that the agencies be in the premier agency that we need it to be. So, again, to the Inspector General, please know how much I appreciate your staff, and I know they beat their head on frustration trying to get things, but I am very pleased to hear, Mr. Patterson, about the progress and cooperation. That's very, very encouraging and very much appreciated. So we thank you both for the work, and this hearing now stands adjourned.